Welcome, viewers, to Diaspora Voices, our program about the Kashmiri community, people who've come from Azad Kashmir or are from the diaspora community who've made home away from Azad Kashmir. It's our aim to learn about them, learn from them, their words of wisdom from their life and works. Today it's my pleasure to welcome Javed Khan. Welcome, Javed. Tell us
Yes,
about yourself.
yeah, thank you, Karamat, for that introduction. Delighted to be here on Diaspora Voices. So my story is quite simple, really. I was British-born Kashmiri. My parents originated from the Dadial region, a small village called Haveli Baghat, just outside Dadial. Both of them were illiterate in all languages, never been touched by the magic wand of education, which I, to this day, believe was a great strength for them, not a hindrance, actually. Perhaps we'll talk about that. Born in High Wycombe, moved to Birmingham at age 1, I believe it was, back in the 60s, and grew up in Spark Brook, the infamous Spark Brook, one of the most deprived places in history, and still is one of the most deprived places in history. And yet it's had more regeneration done to it, more money spent on it than probably any other part of Birmingham. But it is what it is. And it was a great mix of people, new people, new arrivals coming and living there and then moving on and being replaced by other new arrivals. And then so I lived in Birmingham, studied in Birmingham, went to Manchester, 4 years university, scraped a maths degree, did my teacher training qualifications there, and came back to Birmingham and started life as a teacher. And then lived in Birmingham till the age of 40. And then when I was appointed director of education in Harrow, moved out, which was an enormously difficult decision to move out of the place of, of your childhood dreams where all your family is and so on. And but it was a great opportunity, and went to London and ended up staying in London for about 17 years, moving around different jobs, director of education, children's services, worked in the civil service as an executive director, and then became chief executive of Victim Support, a very large national victims charity for covering England and Wales. And then for 8 years, the privilege of my life being chief executive of Barnardo's, the largest children's charity in the UK, covering all 4 nations, 20,000 people, hundreds of millions of pounds of budget, access to royalty and politicians and media and everything else that came with it. And then in about 2.5 years ago, decided to stop working full time, and then entered the world of non-executive director roles on various boards and so on. And that was a very big decision for me. I was under the age of 60 at the time, post-COVID, post-COVID burnout, you could say, and just wanted to do something different in my life when I was still young and relatively fit enough to do it. Become a grandfather, wanted to spend more time with the grandchildren, wanted to start playing cricket again, moved out of London into the relative countryside. And so the rest is history, as I say. And alhamdulillah, with the grace of the Almighty, I've been blessed with great opportunities since then. One of which, as you say, was to be asked by the government to lead a review into smoking in the UK.
Yeah, I think properly became aware of you probably 20 years ago when we did a project on Asian role models in Birmingham, and I remember arranging photographing you, sending a
Mm.
photographer at the Mirpuri Development Day.
Mm.
Did did one of our team interviewed you? We produced a bit of a bio, and I think later I was in Birmingham Education when you
Mm.
were one of the leaders, and I'm somebody who's first generation immigrant, and I look at people of your generation, and it gives me hope that you've carried on the traditions, the values of our community, and I've often sat there thinking, if I was of a different age, different opportunities, different situations, then I'd want to be more like you, so you've been a role model for me and for many others, but and you've just told us effectively your curriculum vitae summary, and it's very impressive. And it's very easy. And you mentioned, at the very outset, your parents, illiterate parents from Aweli Bagal. And it's very easy for our generation, for my generation, for your generation particularly, and the younger generations now, it's very easy for us to forget the real sacrifices of the first generation, your parents' generation. You mentioned they were illiterate, but in many ways, who they were is now in front of us. We see them in you. Can you tell us a little more about them?
Well, you're being particularly kind in all of those comments. I feel very humbled. I've never felt that I've done anything special, in my career or anything exceptional. I've been very fortunate, and it starts with your parents. I credit everything to them. Like most people in the 60s, 70s in inner city Birmingham, we barely saw our father. He worked 7 days a week, every bit of overtime that he could get, and he was in and out of jobs all the time. There was a lot of discrimination and racism and prejudice in those days, but he struggled and he worked very hard for his family, and not just, not just family here, but family back home as well. That was the purpose of coming to the UK, to support a whole extended family, and he did all of that, and he took it in his stride. And so, what that still instilled in us is a very hard work ethic. We didn't have any materialism in our families. We had hardly any books, we had no toys, we had none of those kind of things that kids take for granted today. And in our mother, we had a most exceptional, homemaker, which taught us a lot about love, affection, compassion, and the importance of family. And those values stayed with us. And when I first really began to think about that was when I was appointed as chief executive of Barnardo's back in 2014. And there was a big deal in those days. Barnardo's was nearly 150 years old. I was the first non-white, non-Christian chief executive to be appointed to such a role, and it was headline news. And I had lots of media interviews, and a journalist from the Guardian came to me one day, and he asked me for my story, and I told him briefly, and he paused, and he said the story you've just told me about your childhood. He said you really should have been a Barnardo's child, because Barnardo's is all about looking after the most vulnerable in society, the disadvantaged, the poverty-stricken, those who don't have much in their lives. And it really gave me a jolt, and I thought about it, and I sat back and I thought, well, hang on a second, I've never thought about myself like that. I've never thought about my childhood like that, as being deprived or disadvantaged in any way. And I said, no, you're wrong, actually. I wouldn't have been a Barnardo's child, because I had the one thing in my life, along with my siblings, that Barnardo's children of today don't have, and that is unconditional love. That's what our parents gave us. There was no materialism. They couldn't buy us all the stuff that other kids had. We wore secondhand clothes and all that kind of stuff. But we had unconditional love, and it's that love that goes right deep into your heart, into your DNA, and helps define who you are and gets you through the difficult moments of the having and the not having stuff. And that's what our parents provided, not just my parents, all parents of that generation, they provided that. And there was that, come what may kind of attitude of, we will get through, no matter what the difficulties are, no matter what challenges we face. And when I compare that to modern day and the hundreds of thousands of children that Bernardo supported, the big ingredient that's missing in their lives is that love. Some of them may have the latest trainers, they may have 2 phones in their pocket, may have the PlayStations and so on, but the love that a family gives you is often what's missing, and that's a key ingredient. So that mattered a lot to me, and that's why I say, if my parents had been educated, and some like other friends of mine, their parents were educated, maybe they would have lost out on some of that and gained something else. But for me, that ingredient was critical.
Yeah, actually, I sometimes, because my own parents were similar, I think my dad had 3 years of schooling, and but he always came across as the most educated person. When you met him, you'd think he had all the degrees in his curriculum vitae, and so I actually separate out educated from schooled.
Mm, mm,
So I think, I briefly on one or two occasions met your parents.
mm.
I think they were educated, they just were not schooled,
Yeah, yeah.
because there
Very
were
good point.
no schools, and I've done quite a lot of research
Mm,
into Kashmiri education, and there were very few schools in those days, and the schools that were there were many miles away, and it was hostile environment. There were no roads, no transport, and so on. So that would have been just for your father if he was
mm,
lucky, and for girls there was nothing,
mm.
and but they received education through conversation, through their own upbringing, by their parents, by their community, and their education and their
Mm.
values then become expressed in their parenting, what they did,
Yeah.
their own hard work in your dad's case, working in hostile world, working
Mm,
in that world, and going out all hours that God gave him. Your mom, what she did, very intelligent, very loving, caring mom that you had, and um, and then the values they passed to you, they
mm,
sent you home. I did a an article, researched article on ethnic capital not too long ago amongst the Kashmiri parents, and I did not interview you, but I could have interviewed you and found similar stories of
mm.
your parents may not have gone to your school, but they actually did something really foundational and transformative at home that sent you
Yeah.
with the right mindset to school, that made you the person you are. And I think,
Absolutely, no doubt
you
about it. I mean,
know,
you will have seen in your extended family, as I saw in many of mine, in some of the most sophisticated orators that you will ever meet. Yet
yes,
they never had any education, any formal education. I've rubbed shoulders with the great and good of this country, from politicians through to some of the most amazing speakers you will ever find. And some of my uncles, including my mother as well, were so socially intelligent and skilled in using linguistic abilities of different sorts that they would compete with any of them any day. And it was that spoken word, as you said, that was a natural skill that they developed. And my fear is, if they'd gone through formal education, it might have knocked that out of them.
yes, yes. Um, I'm getting ready to give a talk at Aston University, and I think somewhere in the talk is mention of trauma of migration, and certainly listening to you uh, about your dad going out in the hostile world of Spark Brook in the 50s and 60s, and your mom living in her home in her neighborhood in that hostile world. They will have left their families, their
Mm,
communities, very close relatives back in Kashmir.
hmm.
Did you, growing up, did you, or through your life, did you ever reflect on that trauma from your parents' perspective?
Yeah, so when we were very young, no, because we were oblivious to it. They
Mm.
rarely spoke about it. But I first went to Pakistan, Kashmir, when I was just 10 years old
Yes,
with my father, which was a blessed opportunity, really, because I never got it again. And he hadn't been back home for at least, I think, 12, 15 years, because he was here to work and work and work and earn money and send it and so on. And then he went and he took me. And the reason I was lucky, the lucky one chosen out of six, was because I was just under the age of 11. And in those days, your ticket was half price or a quarter or something like that. So I got taken. We went in the height of summer. And so I came back bruised and bitten by mosquitoes and all that kind of stuff. This was in the days when there was no electricity, there were no toilets. etc., in the villages. But the reason I cite that was when we arrived in the village, in the period between my father having last gone and then gone, his mother and his father had passed away, and he hadn't been able to go at the time of their passing. And so I saw, as a young child, the outpouring of emotion from him and all of his extended family, which completely just blew me away. I just was oblivious to it. And I began to realize the importance of that part of the world to my parents and what they had lost by coming to the UK and what they'd sacrificed, I should say, in order to find a better way for their children, the future, and et cetera, et cetera. That really hit me. And when I think back to, there are key moments in your childhood that define you. That was a very important defining moment for me. That's 5 weeks that I spent in Azad Kashmir, traveling around to parts of Pakistan as well, and I'd say being burnt and coming back, and I couldn't tie the laces on my shoes. My feet were so swollen. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it connected me with my family, with my roots and origin, that has stuck with me ever since.
Yes, I think you were just about second generation. You were born here, but you and your family were pioneers in many ways, because many of the families had children much later, and I think you've given us a glimpse of becoming Kashmiri, exploring your identity. What was it like? I mean, Spark Brook wasn't as diverse. There weren't as many Kashmiris. There weren't as many Asian or ethnic minority children. What was it like? What was the process like of being a minority child, becoming Kashmiri, exploring identity, and so on for you?
So I wouldn't overemphasize the becoming Kashmiri bit. There was that connection with now understanding where our origins were from. But beyond the extended family, it didn't mean very much. That really came to me much, much later. I think when I went to university and began to spend time with other people from different backgrounds and so on. And then, you have a Pakistani society at university. I happened to be the president for that for a year and began to understand my identity more. But coming back to Spark Brook, Spark Brook was a fascinating place and still is. As I say, one of the most deprived, disadvantaged. But in those days, it was quite a mixed community. So we had the British Pakistanis, which included Kashmiris and Pathans and so on, from Northwest Frontier. But we also had black communities. We had white communities. We had Irish communities there, who probably had been there longer than we had, and then were beginning to move out. But we grew up together, and we all went to the local Church of England school, Christchurch School, which in itself was a fascination. I often reflect about that now, because some of the things we did in that school then, which was, we sang the Lord's Prayer every morning in that school. We sang hymns. Jerusalem is still my favorite hymn. We had things like Morris dancing. I used to take part in that and go to church fetes and dance and so on and all of that. If that was happening today, I think many of our British Muslim communities would be in uproar of what their children are being forced to do. Yet at that time, there was no connection between family and school. Because of the lack of education, parents never went to parents' evenings ever, because they couldn't speak the language and there were no translators. Our school reports were never really read by anybody. We actually signed on behalf of our parents ourselves. So what went on at school was a different world to what went on at home. And the two never met, but they never conflicted either. And you think about what goes on today with these demonstrations outside schools about what's being taught and what's not being taught. No, I'm not passing judgment on right or wrong. I'm saying it was a very different world where there were no conflicts as such. Now, did it do us harm, or did it strengthen our identity? Is an interesting debate. You might want to do a piece of research on it. I think it'd be fascinating. Twice a year we used to go to the old Christ Church next to Farm Park, which doesn't exist anymore. We had formal kind of Christian ceremonies there, and we all sat there. The young Muslims, the Sikhs, the Hindus, we all just sat there as part and parcel of what we did, and nobody raised it as an issue. So that was part of the kind of, growing up and trying to understand what's going on. perhaps when it was hands together, eyes closed, we kept one eye open and our hands may not have been aligned, just to be different. But there was nothing more than that ever. Going into secondary school, I went to Golden Hillock Secondary School, which unfortunately, because of Trojan Horse, doesn't exist as a name anymore, which is really sad, and for another day perhaps. But being part of an inner city kind of comprehensive community, multicultural, multiracial, multi-faith, was also a great strength, I would say, as opposed to the monocultural, monofaith school cohorts that exist in large parts of the big conurbations in this country now. That was also a great strength. So, so my best friend, I remember, was a young Hindu guy. We did everything together, from playing badminton as partners to playing cricket to studying together, copying each other's homework. Him introducing me to Stevie Wonder, in my mid-teens, and it transformed me ever since. That was a very different kind of experience, I think, until I got to university, when I began to meet more British Pakistanis, who were of certain education level and certain level of reading skills and so on and all that, and interest groups, and began to discover an identity which had never been instilled in me in my parents, not forcefully or not consciously. We knew who we were, we went to pray, etc., but not in a very conscious way. That came much, much later. And then when in my working life, I still remember to this day, my first job was as a maths teacher at Cadbury Sixth Form College in Kings Norton, which was fantastic, a fantastic place to teach. But I was very much insecure British, Asian, British Pakistani, British Muslim, very insecure in terms of sharing my true identity. And I remember once I got called to the secretary's office because my mother was ringing from home for I can't remember what it was now. And I picked up the phone, and of course my mother speaks Pahari, as our home language. And so that's what I spoke. And I was really embarrassed to speak to her in that language in front of all these white British secretaries that were and administrators that were in the office. And I was whispering, really, and I felt quite ashamed. But why was I whispering? But I didn't have the confidence to do that. And it wasn't until I moved to a place called East Birmingham College in those days, the old Garrett's Green Tech, which became City College later. And I started working there with people who were much more confident in their identity, non-white colleagues. And there was a fantastic guy who was the head of diversity there. He was a big black African guy, and he used to come in wearing his African robes and so on. He was confident in his identity, and we stuck up a friendship. And he helped me understand actually this embarrassment that I was feeling inside, and how I needed to connect my inner self with my outer self. And then that began a journey for me of discovery about being louder and prouder about who I was. And you may remember when I was at Birmingham City Council as an assistant director under the great Tim Brighouse, God rest his soul. The bigger the event, the more confident I was to turn up wearing a shalwar kameez. And people found that very difficult to understand at the time. But by that point of my career, I was more confident in who I was and exhibiting who I was very publicly, and also with an intention of trying to encourage other younger colleagues to be more confident in themselves. But it was quite a journey to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are times when, young people from our own community, people much younger, who what one would expect to have more confidence, more courage, they may hold themselves back, thinking, this job opportunity that is there is so big, maybe it's too out of reach for me. And listening to some of the things you were talking about that you've done, they're massive things. So what led you to have such a career trajectory? Were there times when you were conscious that you were actually pushing your luck as a brown person, as a minority person? Now, I can see you're visibly what I describe visibly Muslim, and we live in times where being visibly Muslim is not something easy. what, based on your own journey, what advice would you offer to young people in the Kashmiri community in particular? You know, we're one of the largest ethnic minority communities, and don't always access the opportunities. What advice would you offer?
So there's no one simple answer to that, my journey and, what I would advise other people to do. But I often think about it. I think, our parents were pioneers. The fact that they left, their villages and, a relatively, peasant lifestyle, and with the 5 quid in their pocket or whatever they could muster, came on a plane and came to a country where they couldn't speak the language, had no kind of source of income to start with, etc., etc. All of that, that is a really difficult kind of journey that they took, and and put ourselves in their shoes, lack of language and all that kind of stuff. Right? Would we be prepared to do that? Would we be brave enough? I'm not sure we would. So that pioneering spirit, I think, is instilled in all of us, certainly our generations, because we saw it, we felt some of that pain and that challenge, and I think that has stuck with me. So that instilled in me this kind of ride your luck where you can, take a risk, apply for the jobs that you think you won't even get, that kind of thing. Too many youngsters these days, and I do a lot of mentoring, voluntary mentoring, all sorts of people. Too many people, feel that they're not qualified, that they haven't got the skills, that the ability required in the job is going to be too great for them, etc., etc. And often what I talk to them about is, anybody in those jobs that's already there is already suffering from imposter syndrome. So you'll be in good company, right? If you're not confident, most of them fake it till they make it, right? You will have heard that phrase. That goes on all the time in all of our professional kind of places that we've worked. We've seen it. And we've also seen that the people who get those jobs aren't necessarily additionally skilled or exceptional in anything. But there is an approach that you can be trained upon. It can be shared with you that helps you get those jobs. So I've learned some of that, and I learned from some very good people. So I was never shy to ask for advice. Was one of the things I would advise everybody else to do. Ask, and ask. And people will tell you different things. Take the very best and try and implement it. But don't be shy. Don't hide away. Don't shy away and think I can never do this and I can't ask somebody else for help either. You need that help, and there's some key people in my life that have been very helpful to me. Another key aspect of my journey, and it's interesting, you mentioned the faith thing. When I was age 25, I believe, 25, 26, before I even got married, I was blessed with the opportunity to perform the Hajj, and took my mother and my younger sister with me. And that was back in 1990. And it was a kind of unexpected journey. I wasn't particularly religious and so on, but my mother wanted to go. Our father passed away about 4 years before that, and it was a more enormous emotional period for our family, and we were just about recovering from that sudden death. And my mom had got quite ill as a result of that. She was widowed in her early 40s, the big age gap between her and my father. And so I took her to Hajj as part of a therapeutic kind of opportunity for her, really. But it had an enormous influence on me. We spent 4 weeks in Saudi Arabia. And when I look back at my career, coming back from there, I was then at that point a lecturer at East Birmingham College. I'd say over the next 15 years, it literally was like if I picked up a stone, I'd find gold underneath it. My career trajectory was like traveling in the fast lane of the motorway, whereas I was sitting on the bonnet of the car. I wasn't even driving. I was just being pushed and thrust into these amazing opportunities. Being appointed assistant director at Birmingham City Council, I think I was about 34, 35, was an enormous, opportunity. Blessed to work with people like Tim Breghouse and that ilk of, kind of caliber people in the largest local authority in Europe. I didn't feel I was deserving of that. That was all part and parcel of this inner strength that I'd got from my faith, of that our job in life is to put in 100%, 110% even, to every opportunity you get on a daily basis. But also, alongside that, not worry about tomorrow, because your destiny is not in your control. So take a risk, go for those jobs. Whether you get them or not, it's nothing you should worry about. If you didn't get it, it could be the best blessing that could have been given to you. And there are many jobs that I went for that I didn't get. And of course, it hurts at the time because you put in a lot of effort and so on, knocks your ego. But actually, not getting them was some of the best things that happened to me. I never would have ended up being the chief executive of Bernardo's if I'd got some of those other jobs. So it's a combination of things. I think pioneering spirit from my parents, love of my parents, which gave me an inner confidence, discovering myself, being brave and bold to ask people's advice and take that advice, and then putting myself forward for things that I didn't always believe I was good
Yeah.
enough or would get. And then when you get the job, fake it till you make it.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about successes and failures, getting the jobs and not getting the jobs. I think I've certainly I can relate to the to this reliance on God, on a higher being. There are times when I apply for things, not so many these days, but in the recent past, where I've decided, a job or an opportunity was for me. I would submit an application, and then my prayer was, God, please don't give me this job if I'm not the best person for it.
Mm,
If there
mm,
are other things you would rather I was doing, if there's another person who is better than me who you want to place in that position. So actually handing it over to a
yeah.
higher being,
Yeah.
because, and like you, I've also found situations where then I would not get one particular job, and then I get another job, and I'm
Mm,
thinking if I had got that previous job, the second job I wouldn't
yes.
have got. And,
Yes.
the second job was better for me.
Mm,
And
mm,
um, I think the other thing we talk about is representation and role models, and maybe talk about it too much in a restrictive way. That people say, oh, the reason these young people aren't applying or aspiring for certain positions is because they don't see somebody like them in those
mm.
positions. And I think for my generation, and certainly for your generation, there weren't the brown people,
No.
minority people,
Mm,
Kashmiri people in those positions. So I'm imagining some of your role models were people from outside of your community.
mm,
Um,
mm.
uh,
Yeah.
is
There were
that so?
no Pakistani
Yeah,
Kashmiri role models. You're absolutely
yeah.
right. I can't think of one.
So
Yeah.
is it possible to have role models and learn from people outside of our communities?
Most definitely it is. Yeah. But you've got to hunt them out.
Okay.
I think sometimes people don't put enough effort in and expect all the reward, right? Yes, it's hard work. There is no compensation. There's no alternative to the hard graft. And that begins with yourself to understand who you are, what matters to you, what your values are, what will make you happy, what you don't want to do. The bit that people often forget, they'll do anything. No, you can't do anything because you end up pretty unhappy if you end up doing the wrong thing. So really discover yourself, take advice from others about yourself as well, including the what's not right about what you do, and then think about what it is that you're really looking for and who are these people and hunt them out. I often, when I'm asked to give talks about, how did you break the glass ceiling, I start by saying it's not a glass ceiling, it's armor plated steel that you have to
Mm,
break into, right? That's how
mm,
tough it is. And you have to prepare. You have to put a lot of effort in to that stage of the journey. Doing well in the job comes much, much later. And that effort is hunting down the people who really you look up to, who might be the people that could be your advisors, could be your mentors, could be your coaches, your leadership kind of, emblems that you aspire to. For me, Tim Brighouse was one of those. Always
mm,
was. When I was just a lecturer in a college, I knew about Tim because I used to read his articles and read about him and what he'd done and what he was up to and so on. And then the chance to work for him, was a blessed opportunity. But
mm,
if I hadn't done that homework and I wouldn't always been interested in that, I don't think I ever would have got the interview, because of what I was able to do in my interview was to connect with him at an intellectual level about the future of education in Birmingham, something that mattered to him, which
mm,
I was already in the know because I followed his career. And that takes effort. I meet too many young people who don't put that effort in at the
mm,
moment, and it's a sign of the times, isn't it? We're in a material world where every young person grows up and wants to have the BMW or the Mercedes parked outside, doesn't quite understand the effort they've got to put in to
mm,
earn that. They want to wear the latest stuff, the latest trainers, and all of that stuff. I don't begrudge them that. But the hard graft it takes to earn the money in a legal way to get to those positions where you can afford all of that and live within your means is a very important part of learning. And when we think back to our childhood, when I think about the value of money, I have this conversation with my children all the time. We didn't have any money as children. And it was never a problem because we had a happy childhood. We played conkers and we played cricket with broken pieces of stick and we played gully danda and all that stuff, right? We passed our time and we were happy. We didn't have the PlayStations and so on. But what it taught us was the value of money. And to this day, you value what God gives you, what He blesses you with in terms of your sustenance, and you don't waste it. And some of those values and principles, are because of the material world that we live in, and we can't turn it back. It is what it is. We just need to work with the next generation to help them hold on to some of those really important values, which will stand the test of time in their kind of future work and their future family development.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time is ticking away. I think the thing I wanted to explore with you was the review you undertook for the government. I remember thinking, there are always reviews and reports that have somebody's name on them, and I was thinking, wow, what an achievement and demonstration of your career trajectory that the government asks you to lead a review on smoking. Just tell us a little about how you came to lead that review and what it was about.
So I had recently just stepped down from Barnardo's and was developing my kind of non-executive career, as it were. I'd taken on a couple of boards, and I think it was about 4 or 5 months since I'd stepped down from Barnardo's. And out of the blue, one January, I got a call from the then Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. That doesn't happen every day, right? And where SOS actually wants to speak to you directly. And what he said to me, this was Sajid Javed at the time.
Yes.
And we'd crossed paths before on a number of things, and I'd been on the Grenfell fire task force and so on, and he was one of the senior ministers responsible for that at the time. And he approached me and he says, "I hear you've got nothing to do. I've got a little task for you," is the way that he put it to me. And I said, "Who told you I've got nothing to do? I'm very happy. This is the life I now want." He said, "No, look, there's something really important." Where the government's worried about not hitting its targets for the smoking kind of tobacco control plan, and we'd like somebody independent to come and do a review and give us your recommendations, and we want it to be you. To which I said, of course, I said, "Look, I know nothing about this subject. I'm not a smoker. I can't even stand it when people smoke next to me. So I'm not your person, right? It's not my skill set." He said, No. That's exactly why we want you to do it, because you're totally independent. We don't want somebody who's a smoker or even, kind of stands around with smokers. We want somebody independent, somebody with credibility from their career, and somebody, who people will not object to." So it was a very hard sell. Now, it's very hard to say no to a Secretary of State when you get approached like that. So begrudgingly, really, to be honest, I took it on. It's not something I'd planned to do. And it was the kind of challenge, where somebody says you do X and you're thinking my skills are over here, they're not over there. How am I going to, And I remember telling my family that I'd agreed to do this, and one of my daughters said, "But how are you going to do that? You know nothing about it." And I said, "I'll tell you one thing. The reason I've got confidence is because of what the career opportunities I've been blessed in. I've been thrown into some very big arenas. I've been worried about how I'm going to do it, but now I have the confidence that I can think on my feet, and I will be able to find a way, because I've been able to find a way before. That's why I've said yes to this. Otherwise, I'm as petrified as anybody else would be." Well, I took it on, and it took about 6 months. So I had a team of civil servants, working for me, and I led the review, and I scoured the world literally. I think there were 14 countries that we approached, the leading academics and practitioners, etc., campaigners, lobbyists, including the 4 nations here. And then in June 2022, I published my report. It was like a 100-page kind of report, which you'd have seen. And the civil servants called it the Khan Review into smoking, which I was very humbling. I wasn't going to call it that. And they said, "No, that's traditional. You got to put your surname to it."
Yes.
Well, great, fantastic. So I did it, and I published it, and I made some very radical recommendations in it. And this comes back to that pioneering spirit of no fear, You know, I said, I spoke my mind, even though there were people behind the scenes in the civil service and political advisors who they couldn't tell me what to do because I was independent, but they were sending me messages to say, don't be too radical, because the government at that time, which was led by Boris Johnson, is not in support of the heavily radical kind of solution that you might be working on. So of course I ignored them completely and went as radical as I wanted to be. And the headline message was that in order to really address the challenge of smoking in this country, you have about 6 million smokers. About 2/3 of them will die as a result of it. A huge drain on public services to the tune of about 17 billion pounds of taxpayers' money to support the impact of smoking. I said that they needed to get rid of smoking or the sale of cigarettes in this country once and for all, but do it in a graduated way. So raise the age of sale by 1 year at a time until nobody can ever buy a cigarette again in this country. Hence, the head title was Making Smoking Obsolete. And there were a number of other recommendations, including controlling the vaping industry on how it promotes and advertises vapes to children. You know, to this day, there is no law in this country that stops a vaping company from handing out vapes to children. They can't hand out cigarettes, but they can hand out vapes, and they do, in order to addict them so that they become buyers later on. So my recommendation was put a stop to all of that. So I published it to fanfare, but no political support. And for the next 6-9 months, Boris Johnson was in power, and it didn't get a look in. And so, you know, I'd done my job. I was kept getting called by the media. You know, what do you think? What's going on? Are you upset? Are you annoyed? And I'd give my interviews. Then Liz Truss came along. She wasn't around long enough. But then Rishi Sunak came. And it soon kind of became clear that Rishi was looking for some legacy projects. And because I was in touch with Number 10 and the department and so on a regular basis, and I began to hear that he was getting more and more interested in this as one of his legacy programs. And then he adopted it. And of course, you know, he took it through Parliament. The sad thing was that we were 9 days away from the final reading of the new bill in Parliament, and he calls an election. So everything ground to a halt. And you never know with politics. You know, politics is an unpredictable kind of game. But what I was very pleased was that Rishi had said in his manifesto for the election, and Keir Starmer had said in his manifesto for the election, that either way they would both come back to that legislative agenda and implement that my recommendations. So either way, we were going to get it in. And now, you know, very pleasingly, in the King's speech last week, Labour have announced that they will introduce the smoking legislation within the next 12 months. So one way or another, the Khan Review is going to have the impact that it set out to do, which is very humbling.
Thank you for that. As an equality diversity practitioner, and you know, for many years, my focus was very general on ethnic minorities and ethnic inequalities. But latterly, I'm always wanting to know what the implications are for our own community. So whenever I get hold of a report, I will get hold of the PDF, put in the search, firstly, you know, words such as ethnic minorities, Muslim, and latterly Pakistani and Kashmiri, because I'm interested in whether there was any acknowledgement of these minority communities and what the report said. So, you know, Birmingham produced a health profile of the Pakistani community, and I'm thinking actually 2/3 of the community are actually Kashmiri community, and it was one of the very saddest health profiles. There are some serious health issues in the Birmingham Pakistani Kashmiri community. I'm very conscious also, and have been for a very long time, that smoking continues to be a problem in the Kashmiri community. Some of the people will, you know, watch this program. Did you look at ethnic minorities or generally, or communities such as the Pakistani Kashmiri communities?
So we did. However, you may not be surprised to know that the data that was available to us just wasn't good enough. right? Because the Department of Health and Social Care has never monitored the smoking and the impact of smoking broken down with those statistics in mind. And I took it further because I asked questions not just about smoking tobacco and cigarettes, but also shisha, for example, which, as you know, around every corner there are shisha bars. And then if you look at the Somali community, the use of cat, the kind of tobacco in the mouth, which causes oral cancer. There were literally no statistics to help us understand the challenge of that. So in my report, it's a small section, but there's a section in there where I was urging government to invest in further research around those minority communities and the impact of a whole range of tobacco-based products, oral or smoked, in order to come up with detailed recommendations. I couldn't, because there wasn't the data to back it up, and I wanted to follow the data. What I was really pleased about, though, was that had the desired effect on the Rishi Sunak government, certainly, because when their legislative plan came out and they produced the draft bill, in the bill, they were talking not just about stopping smoking cigarettes, but stopping shisha as well, and stopping cat. And so they've taken it a first stage further, which is exactly what I wanted to see. They've done it themselves. And they went further in cigars and so on, because some communities smoke cigars particularly. So shisha bars, for example, there's a number 2. And what we don't know yet is what will the draft bill that Labour produce, what will it say? Will they replicate? Will they water it down? Or will they actually increase some of those restrictions? Which would be great. So we didn't have the data to make any conclusive recommendation, but the impact will be there now.
Yes, I think often this thing, there is no data is the response, and of course, one response to that is actually gathering the data through quantitative and qualitative research, and thankfully, in your review, you recommended that there should be further research, and hopefully there will be further research that digs into the Pakistani Kashmiri community, what the problems are, what the issues are, and what can be done about it. And hopefully, people listening to this conversation, maybe you yourself will keep an eye on it and explore opportunities, because there are certainly issues in our community that need to be addressed, and hopefully the research will be gathered. So there will be specific data on Pakistani Kashmiris eventually.
Yeah, I think so. It's essential. It's essential that we break it down. You and I have talked before about the inadequacies of data capture. You just look at the forms that organizations still use about ethnicity. It's way out of date, really. People are still having to tick boxes like Black Asian or Black British. What does that really tell us about our communities? Indian, for example, even British Indian. What does that tell you? The size of India. If you travel from Delhi to Bangalore, it's like traveling from London to Athens. Right? I mean, the data really is just not good enough at the moment. I mean, I'm hopeful, maybe naive, but I'm hopeful that more and more people are realizing this, and government are realizing it as well, that you've got to have the breakdown of that data in order to give the right kind of understanding. And in the Pakistani Kashmiri world, it's also important. We know, you and I have argued with other people over the years about the British Pakistani identity is just so inadequate, because it confuses the Karachi, the Lahore, the Urdu speaking, the intergenerational educated classes with the uneducated Kashmiri heritage that we have, or those from KPK. If you separated out these statistics, you would find that the disadvantage is far more severe than when you lob it together with the Punjab and the Sindh. It's very, very different. So we're a long way away from that, I think. But I think we're better than where we were just a few years ago.
Yes. Javed, I'm conscious of the time. I'm conscious of your time. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to explore, to discuss. Thank you for all that you've done to make our world a better place. And God bless you in all that you are yet to do in the future. So for now, I'm grateful. Thank you. God bless.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity.